Lucas Bryant had been waiting for this day for months. Every extra shift at the warehouse, every late night stocking shelves, every weekend spent lifting heavy boxes, it had all been leading up to this moment. His father's birthday was in 2 days, and Lucas had finally saved enough to buy him something special: a watch. Not just any watch, but a real one, the kind with weight to it, the kind a man like his father deserved. His dad had worked construction for 30 years, sun up to sun down, hands rough from years of labor, never once spending money on himself. He didn't believe in luxury, only necessity. The boots he wore were older than some of Lucas's cousins. His wallet was so worn that it barely held its shape. But a watch. Lucas had always noticed how his father admired them. He never said it out loud, never lingered too long in front of a store display, but Lucas saw the way his eyes flicked toward a man's wrist when he noticed a good timepiece. So, today was the day. Lucas stepped through the glass doors of Harrington & Co., the kind of jewelry store where the lighting made everything look 10 times shinier, where the air smelled like polished wood and expensive cologne. He had checked the website, picked out the model, knew exactly how much it cost, down to the tax. His wallet was heavy in his pocket with the cash he had withdrawn that morning. Everything was set. Except, as soon as he stepped inside, something shifted. He knew the feeling. It wasn't new. Behind the glass counter stood a woman, Brenda Calloway, who had probably been working there for years. She had that kind of look, like she knew the price of every item by heart, like she could spot a real diamond from a fake one with a glance. Her name tag was pinned neatly to her blouse, her hair styled in the way that suggested she took her job seriously. She saw him. And just like that, the air in the room changed. Lucas kept walking, slow, steady, like he always did in places like this. He scanned the cases, his eyes moving over the rows of watches. He spotted the one he wanted almost instantly. Silver casing, deep blue face, clean, classic. His father would love it. Brenda, meanwhile, wasn't moving. Lucas felt her watching him. Not in the way a salesperson watches a customer, ready to offer help, but in the way someone watches a problem unfold. Like she was waiting for him to do something. He ignored it. He had dealt with worse. He walked up to the counter, pointing to the watch he had come for. "I'd like to see that one." She didn't move. Instead, her arms crossed and her eyes narrowed just slightly. "Are you sure?" Lucas knew that tone. He had heard it before. Still, he kept his voice even. "Yeah, I'm sure." Brenda didn't look convinced. She glanced at his clothes, his shoes, his hands. Then, instead of reaching for the key to unlock the case, she tilted her head. "It's expensive." Lucas let out a slow breath, pulling out his wallet, flipping it open so the bills inside were visible. More than enough. Exactly enough. He watched her eyes flicker to the cash. For a moment, he thought that would be enough. But something in her face hardened, like the money didn't matter, like none of it mattered. She hesitated. Then she stepped back. "I think I should call the owner first," she said. "You wait right here." She didn't pick up the store phone. She pulled out her personal cell. Lucas's stomach tightened. "I'd like to report a suspicious individual," Brenda said, her voice smooth, careful, deliberate. "Young male, acting nervous. I think he's trying to steal something." Lucas heard the words, but for a second his brain refused to process them. This wasn't happening. Except it was. She was calling the cops. On him. He had done nothing wrong. Nothing but walk into a store and try to buy a watch. But here he was. Treated like a thief. Lucas took a step back, shaking his head slightly, forcing himself to stay calm. He had seen this play out before. On the news, in videos, in stories told by uncles and cousins. He had heard the warnings, but hearing it and living it were two different things. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I haven't done anything." Brenda's lips curled slightly, smug, satisfied. "Then you have nothing to worry about." Outside, faint but growing louder, he heard the sound of sirens. The sirens were getting closer. Lucas stood there, his wallet still open in his hand, the cash still visible, as if it meant anything now. It didn't. Not to Brenda, not to whoever was on the other end of her call, and definitely not to the cops who were about to walk through that door. He could leave. Just turn around and go. But what would that look like? Running? Like guilt? Like confirming whatever story Brenda was spinning into the phone. So he stayed. Brenda hung up. She didn't look nervous. She looked satisfied, like she had done a good deed. A minute passed, then two. Then, the doors burst open. Two officers stepped inside, hands hovering near their belts. Their eyes locked on him instantly. "There he is," Brenda said, pointing like she had caught him in the act. "I caught him trying to steal." Lucas barely had time to register the accusation before one of the officers, Sergeant Daniels, his badge read, spoke. "Step away from the counter." Lucas didn't move. He opened his mouth, ready to explain, to say something, anything, but before he could, the second officer's hand was on his holster. It wasn't a request. Lucas exhaled, slowly, deliberately. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. He didn't make a scene. He did the only thing he could. He reached for his phone. One press of a button, a call rang through. It picked up on the first ring. "Mom," he said, voice steady, controlled. "I need you at Harrington & Co. right now." Brenda rolled her eyes, arms folding across her chest. "Oh, sure," she said, voice thick with sarcasm. "Let me guess, your mom's a lawyer?" Lucas didn't respond. He didn't have to. The officers exchanged a look. Sergeant Daniels shifted, jaw tightening. There was a flicker of hesitation now, a split-second pause, like maybe, just maybe, they were beginning to wonder if they had stepped into something bigger than they realized. But it was too late for second thoughts. One of them reached for his cuffs, and then the door opened again. Everything changed. The door swung open with authority. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. The moment she stepped inside, the energy in the room shifted. The officers straightened. Brenda, who had been radiating smug confidence just seconds ago, hesitated. The weight of the moment settled before a single word was spoken. Kendra Bryant didn't need to introduce herself. The look on Sergeant Daniels' face said it all. He recognized her. And if he hadn't before, he did now. Brenda, oblivious, stepped forward, her voice filled with the same misplaced confidence. "Thank God you're here, officer," she started. "I caught him." Kendra held up a hand, not to silence her, to dismiss her, like she wasn't even worth the time it would take to let her finish. She reached into her blazer and pulled out a badge. Not just any badge, the kind that carried weight, the kind that made people second-guess every choice that led them to this moment. "Kendra Bryant," she said, voice even, steady, cutting through the room. "United States District Judge." The silence was instant. Brenda's mouth opened, then closed. Sergeant Daniels inhaled sharply, the tension in his posture shifting from authority to regret. The second officer took half a step back, as if distance could erase his involvement. Lucas didn't move. Kendra turned to the officers first. "Did you verify the accusation before reaching for your cuffs?" she asked, her tone calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that meant trouble. "Did you check the security footage? Speak to my son? Gather a shred of evidence before treating him like a suspect?" Sergeant Daniels swallowed. We were just following protocol." Kendra's eyes flicked to the cuffs still dangling from his hand. "Protocol," she repeated. "Tell me, what part of protocol involves taking the word of one person over another without question? What part allows assumption to override investigation?" Neither officer answered. Then she turned to Brenda. "You made a phone call," she said, her voice sharper now. "You told them my son was acting nervous, that he was suspicious." She tilted her head just slightly. "Tell me, what exactly did he do?" Brenda's lips pressed together. He had cash." A beat of silence. Kendra nodded slowly, as if waiting for more. When nothing came, she exhaled through her nose, then spoke again, softer this time, but not gentler. "So, let me get this straight. My son walked into your store. He picked out what he wanted to buy. He had the money to pay for it. And that, to you, was suspicious?" Brenda's confidence crumbled. I was just trying to be cautious." Kendra let the words hang. Then finally, she shook her head. "No," she said. "You were trying to be careful with the wrong person. And now, you've made a mistake that you can't undo." Across the store, Lucas lifted his phone. The screen was still recording. And just like that, it was too late. Brenda saw the phone, and for the first time, the certainty in her expression wavered. The recording had been going the entire time. Every word, every decision, every hesitation. And now, it was evidence, not just of what had happened, but of how easily it had happened. Kendra hadn't looked at the camera once, but she didn't need to. She knew exactly how this would play out. The world had seen too many stories like this before, but today, there would be no confusion, no misinterpretation. Her son had done everything right, and still, he had been treated like a criminal. She turned back to the officers. "I assume you're not planning on making an arrest." Sergeant Daniels shook his head quickly. No, ma'am. The second officer said nothing. He was staring at the floor, likely replaying the last few minutes in his head, realizing the mistake they'd made. Kendra nodded. Good. Then let's talk about next steps. Her voice was steady, almost casual, like she was discussing an everyday inconvenience rather than an egregious overreach of power. But that was what made it worse. The ease with which she handled it. Like this wasn't the first time. Like it wouldn't be the last. Brenda, still standing behind the counter, tried to salvage what little control she had left. This is all a misunderstanding, she said, her voice weaker now. I was just doing my job. Kendra exhaled, slow and deliberate. If this was just a misunderstanding, she said, then why did you assume the worst about my son before he even said a word? Brenda had no answer. Kendra let the silence stretch. Then she turned to the officers once more. I trust you'll be filing a report about this. Sergeant Daniels hesitated before nodding. Yes, ma'am. And I trust you'll include every detail. Another nod, slower this time. She gave a curt smile. Good, because I will be requesting a copy. Brenda shifted uncomfortably. Her gaze flicked between Kendra, the officers, and the phone in Lucas's hand. Then, finally, the reality of the situation seemed to settle in. This wasn't going away, and she had no one to blame but herself. Brenda's breath hitched as the weight of the situation sank in. There was no undoing what had just happened. No rewinding, no backtracking, no explaining it away. The damage was done, and the evidence was sitting in Lucas's hands, still recording. The officers looked like they wanted to be anywhere else but here. Sergeant Daniels gave a tight nod, then glanced at his partner before taking a step back, putting distance between himself and the unfolding wreckage. He knew where this was heading. Kendra, however, was in no rush. She turned back to Brenda, voice calm, almost measured. Do you know how many times I've seen this exact scenario play out? Brenda's jaw clenched. Do you know how many parents have had to watch their children be treated like criminals before they even get a chance to speak? No answer. Do you know how many times it ends differently? That one landed. Brenda shifted, just slightly, but Kendra didn't stop. Today, my son walks out of here because I had the ability to stop it. But what about the kids whose parents don't hold the kind of power I do? What happens to them? The question hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. Brenda didn't speak. Neither did the officers. But Lucas did. His voice was steady, controlled. You never even gave me a chance. Brenda's mouth opened like she wanted to say something, to justify, to argue, to make it less damning. But nothing came out. Because there was no excuse. Not for what she did. Not for how easily she had done it. And now there was nothing left to do but deal with the consequences. The store manager arrived just as the weight of it all began pressing down on Brenda. A middle-aged man in a crisp suit, his expression turned grim the moment he caught sight of the scene. He didn't need to ask what happened. The tension in the air told him everything. Kendra turned to him, voice even. I assume you don't condone racial profiling in your store. The manager barely hesitated. Absolutely not. Then, without missing a beat, he looked at Brenda. You're done here. Collect your things and leave. Brenda's lips parted, but nothing came out. She glanced at the officers, then at Kendra, then finally at Lucas, who was still standing there, phone in hand, silent, unwavering. She had made the call. She had made the assumption. And now, she was the one being dismissed. She gathered her things quickly, without protest. The reality of what she'd done wasn't just sinking in, it was swallowing her whole. As she walked toward the exit, Lucas spoke, not loud, not cruel, just firm. I came here to buy a watch. Brenda paused, but didn't turn around. I thought I was getting something my dad could be proud of, he continued. Turns out, I got something more valuable instead. And with that, she walked out. The store was silent. The officers left next, muttering something about paperwork and reports, but their presence no longer mattered. The damage was done, and the world was about to hear about it. The manager turned back to Kendra and Lucas, looking like he wanted to say something. Apologize, maybe. But Kendra wasn't interested in apologies. She was interested in something bigger. She met her son's gaze. Do you still want the watch? Lucas exhaled, glancing at the glass case, at the item that had started all of this. Then he shook his head. No, he said simply. I don't need it anymore. And with that, he walked out, this time on his own terms. Kendra followed, steps measured, unshaken. Outside, the world moved on. Cars rolled past. Strangers walked the streets, unaware of what had just happened behind the glass doors. But somewhere in some other town, another version of this story was unfolding. Maybe next time, someone would remember this moment. Maybe next time, they'd think twice. Because today, a young black man walked into a jewelry store and was assumed to be a thief, but he walked out as something else. Something stronger, something untouchable. Thank you for taking the time to experience this story. Moments like these remind us why it's so important to challenge assumptions, to question the narratives we've been told, and to recognize the power of fairness, respect, and accountability. Stories like this happen in real life far too often, but every conversation, every shared experience, and every lesson learned brings us one step closer to change. If this story resonated with you, let it be a reminder that we all have a role to play in shaping the world around us. Keep the discussion going, share your thoughts, and most importantly, keep listening.